For thousands of years, Buddhist masters have understood something profound about fear. They discovered that most of what troubles us exists only in the mind, and they found a path to the kind of deep peace that remains steady no matter what life brings. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. Tonight, we will journey through ancient stories and timeless teachings about letting go of fear, not through effort or struggle, but through understanding. These are not complicated philosophies. They are simple truths that have helped countless people find rest. In Buddhist temples around the world, you will find statues of the Buddha with one hand raised, palm facing outward. This gesture is called the Abhaya Mudra, the sign of fearlessness. It is an ancient message offered to all who enter: do not be afraid. Tonight, that message is offered to you. You do not need to remember every story or grasp every teaching perfectly. These truths work best when received with a relaxed and open mind. Take a slow, deep breath, and let us begin our journey together. What would it feel like to walk through this life without fear? Not recklessly, not blindly, but with a quiet steadiness in your heart. Imagine moving through your days with the same ease that a river moves toward the sea. The river does not worry about the rocks in its path. It does not lie awake wondering what storms may come. It simply flows, trusting in its own nature, adapting to whatever it meets along the way. This is the invitation at the heart of Buddhist teaching. Not to become numb to life, but to become free within it. Not to pretend that difficulties do not exist, but to meet them with a mind that is open and a heart that is at peace. There is a statue that stands at the entrance of many Buddhist temples and meditation halls around the world. Perhaps you have seen one yourself. The figure is calm, serene, with eyes that seem to look both inward and outward at once. And one hand is raised, palm facing forward, fingers gently extended toward the sky. This gesture is called the Abhaya Mudra. In the ancient language of Pali, Abhaya means without fear or fearlessness. It is one of the oldest symbolic gestures in Buddhist art, and it carries a message that has echoed across centuries and continents. When you stand before such a statue, something in you begins to quiet. The raised palm seems to say, stop, rest. You do not need to run anymore. You do not need to fight. Whatever you are carrying, you can set it down here. The Buddha himself is said to have made this gesture at pivotal moments in his life. Once, the story goes, he was walking through a forest when a wild elephant, driven mad by those who wished the Buddha harm, came charging toward him. The creature was enormous, trunk raised, eyes wild with confusion and rage. Any ordinary person would have fled, but the Buddha simply stood still. He raised his hand in the gesture of fearlessness, and he radiated such profound peace that the elephant stopped. The great animal grew calm. It lowered its head, and it knelt before him, gentled by a presence that held no fear. This story is not merely about the Buddha's special powers. It is about a truth that lives within each of us. When we are truly at peace, when fear does not control our hearts, we change the energy of every situation we enter. We become like a still pond that calms the ripples around it. But how do we find such peace? How do we become people who can raise our own inner hand and say to life's charging elephants, I am not afraid? To answer this, we must first understand where fear comes from. And for most of us, it begins long before we can remember. Think back, if you can, to your earliest years. Before you knew the names of things, before you understood the world, you arrived in this life as a small and open being, curious about everything, afraid of very little. Watch any young child, and you will see this. They reach toward flames because fire is beautiful. They approach strange animals with wonder. They have not yet learned what they are supposed to fear. And then the teaching begins. It comes from parents who love us and want to protect us. It comes from teachers and older children and the whispered warnings of our culture. Little by little, we are taught that the world is dangerous, that there are monsters under the bed, that if we misbehave, something terrible will happen, that we must be vigilant, careful, always on guard. Some of these warnings carry genuine wisdom. It is good to learn that fire burns, that traffic is dangerous, that some situations require caution. But woven together with useful knowledge comes something else, something that goes beyond healthy awareness and settles into the body as a kind of chronic tension. Fear becomes our companion. It moves into our chest and our shoulders and our jaw. It whispers to us at night. It colors the way we see tomorrow. The Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The whole secret of existence is to have no fear." He did not mean that we should be reckless. He meant that fear, as a way of living, is a kind of prison. When we are ruled by fear, we cannot see clearly. We cannot love fully. We cannot rest. And the strange thing, the thing that meditation reveals with perfect clarity, is that most of what we fear never comes to pass. We spend our lives running from shadows. We exhaust ourselves fighting enemies that exist only in the mind. There is a teaching that says, worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it does not get you anywhere. This is what the Buddha saw so clearly. This is why his hand is raised in peace. Let us explore a story about the nature of learned fear. It is a simple story, but it carries a teaching that goes deep. Many years ago, in a small city somewhere in the southern part of the world, there was a modest meditation center. It was located in an ordinary house on an ordinary street. The rooms were plain and clean. A few cushions sat on the floor, and in one room, placed with great care, was a statue of the Buddha. The statue had been a gift from a visiting teacher, a respected figure in the Buddhist world. It was made of bronze, perhaps 3 feet tall, with the serene expression that such statues carry. The Buddha sat in meditation posture, one hand resting in his lap, the other touching the earth. It was a beautiful object, radiating the same quietude you might feel in a forest temple or beside a still mountain lake. One day, a visitor came to the center. He was a professional man, someone whose work involved investigating groups and organizations that he believed might be harmful to society. He had heard about this meditation center and decided to visit, to see for himself what happened inside. A young woman greeted him at the door. She was warm and open, with the easy manner of someone who has spent time in stillness. She smiled and welcomed him, answered his questions, showed him around the simple rooms. The man began to relax. This did not seem like a dangerous place. These did not seem like dangerous people. The young woman was so natural, so ordinary, so clearly at peace with herself and the world. And then they entered the room with the statue. The man's face changed. His body tensed. His eyes went wide. Before the young woman could say a word, he had turned and fled. Out of the room, out of the house, down the street. He ran as though something was chasing him. Later, the people at the center wondered what had happened. The statue had not moved. It had not spoken. It had simply sat there, as it had sat for years, radiating the same gentle peace it always radiated. Now, this is not a story about the man being foolish. This is a story about all of us. Somewhere in his life, this man had been taught that statues of the Buddha were dangerous. Perhaps someone had told him they contained dark spirits. Perhaps he had read something that filled him with suspicion. Perhaps, in his childhood, someone had planted a seed of fear around anything unfamiliar or foreign. That seed had grown, and when he came face to face with the object of his fear, his body took over. He did not stop to look closely. He did not pause to breathe and observe. He simply ran. How many of us do the same thing in our own ways? We run from conversations that might be uncomfortable. We avoid people who seem different from us. We refuse to try new things because we have decided in advance that they will hurt us. We carry our inherited fears like heavy stones, never stopping to ask whether they are real. The Buddha in that room was not dangerous. It was not even alive. It was simply a reminder of peace. And still, the man ran. There is a beautiful teaching in the Buddhist tradition about how we might approach our inherited fears. It speaks of bringing the light of awareness to the dark corners of the mind. Imagine that you are walking through an old house at night. The electricity has gone out, and you are carrying only a small candle. As you move through the rooms, you see shadows that look like threatening figures. Your heart beats faster. Your breath grows shallow. Every creak of the floorboards seems to signal danger. But then you lift your candle higher. The light reaches into the corners, and you see that the threatening figure is only a coat hanging on a hook. The monster in the hallway is only a stack of old boxes. The scratching sound is only a branch against the window. Nothing has changed except the light. The house is the same house, but your experience of it has been transformed. This is what awareness does to our fears. When we shine the light of attention on them, when we look closely and ask what is really there, we often find that we have been running from coats and boxes. The fears are real in the sense that we truly experience them, but the dangers they point to are often imaginary. Let us explore another story, one that comes from the tradition of forest monasteries where monks and nuns live close to nature, in the wild places of the world. In these forest dwellings, the practitioners are often surrounded by animals. Not the gentle creatures of suburban gardens, but the untamed beings of deep wilderness. There are snakes that slither through the undergrowth. There are insects that crawl and buzz. There are larger animals too, some of them quite capable of harming a human being. One young monk, newly arrived at such a monastery, was deeply afraid. He had grown up in a city where the wildest animal he encountered was perhaps a stray cat. Now he was expected to walk through paths where cobras rested, to sit in meditation while scorpions moved across the leaves nearby, to sleep in a small hut while unknown creatures stirred in the darkness. His teacher, an older monk who had lived in the forest for many years, noticed the young man's fear. "What troubles you?" the teacher asked one evening. "The animals," the young monk confessed. "I am afraid they will harm me." The teacher nodded slowly. He had heard this many times before. "Let me tell you something I have learned," he said. "In all my years in this forest, I have been in the company of countless wild creatures. Snakes have climbed up my back while I sat in meditation. Spiders have walked across my bare skin in the night. Larger animals have passed so close I could hear their breath. And not once have I been harmed." The young monk was astonished. "But how is that possible?" "Because I am not afraid," the teacher said simply. "The animals sense our inner state. When we radiate fear, we become something unfamiliar to them, something that triggers their own instincts of defense. But when we are at peace, we become like a tree or a stone. We are simply part of the forest. There is nothing to fear and nothing to attack." This teaching stayed with the young monk. Slowly, over many months, he learned to soften in the presence of the forest creatures. He learned that fear itself was often the only danger. And eventually, he too could sit in stillness while a spider crossed his arm, feeling not terror, but a kind of gentle kinship with all living things. The Buddha taught that all beings wish to be happy. All beings wish to be free from suffering. This includes the snake, the spider, and the human. When we remember this, something in us relaxes. We are not surrounded by enemies. We are surrounded by fellow travelers, each one doing their best to find safety and peace. Many years ago, a teacher was reflecting on how fear is used in the world. He noticed something that surprised him. Fear, he realized, is often employed as a tool of control. Think about how many structures in human society are built on fear. Children are told to behave or face punishment. Citizens are warned that if they step out of line, consequences will follow. Workers are kept anxious about losing their jobs. Consumers are made to feel that they are not enough, that they need to buy something to fill the emptiness. People have not been loved, the teacher observed. They have been controlled. And the instrument of that control is almost always fear. He was not speaking with bitterness. He was speaking with compassion, because he understood that those who use fear to control others are often themselves afraid. Hurt people, as the saying goes. Frightened people, frighten people. But there is another way. The Buddha offered a path that was built not on fear, but on understanding. He did not threaten his students with punishment if they failed. He did not promise rewards only to those who were perfect. Instead, he invited them to observe their own minds, to understand the causes of suffering, and to walk gently toward freedom. Teach this triple truth to all, he said. A generous heart, kind speech, and a life of service and compassion are the things which renew humanity. Notice what is missing from that teaching. There is no threat. There is no punishment. There is only an invitation to goodness. This is what it means to live without fear as a motivator. It does not mean we become passive or careless. It means we are moved by love instead of terror. We do good not because we are afraid of what will happen if we don't, but because goodness is our nature and we have remembered it. Let us explore another small story, one that shows how fear can hide in unexpected places. There was once a teacher who traveled widely, sharing the practice of meditation with people in many different places. He had been doing this work for decades and had seen all manner of responses to the practice. Some people took to it immediately, their bodies softening, their minds growing quiet. Others struggled, fidgeting and restless, unable to sit still for even a few moments. But what surprised him most was the occasional person who was afraid of meditation itself. "If I close my eyes and go inward," they would say, "something bad might happen. What if dark thoughts come? What if I lose control?" The teacher would listen to these fears with great patience. He understood where they came from. Somewhere, somehow, these people had been taught that stillness was dangerous. Perhaps they had been warned that meditation opened doors to harmful influences. Perhaps they simply feared what they might find in the quiet of their own minds. "In all my years of teaching," the teacher would say gently, "I have never seen anyone harmed by sitting quietly and watching their breath. I have seen people become calmer. I have seen them become kinder. I have seen them find relief from anxieties that had troubled them for years. But I have never seen meditation harm anyone." This reassurance often helped. The fearful person would try, just for a moment, to close their eyes and breathe. And they would discover, often with great surprise, that nothing terrible happened. The world did not end. No dark forces descended. There was only breath, only stillness, only the beginning of peace. What had seemed so frightening was actually the safest place of all. So where does this leave us, dear listener? What can we take from these reflections as we rest here together? Perhaps the first step is simply recognition. We can begin to notice the fears we carry and ask ourselves, gently and without judgment, where did this come from? Was I born with this fear, or did I learn it somewhere? Is it serving me, or is it holding me back? This kind of inquiry is not about blaming anyone. Our parents did their best with what they knew. Our teachers were passing on what they themselves had been taught. The culture we grew up in was shaped by forces far larger than any individual. But understanding the origin of our fears gives us a kind of freedom. We realize that these fears are not inherent to who we are. They were placed in us like furniture in a room. And what has been placed can be rearranged. What has been learned can be unlearned. The Buddha put it simply, nothing is permanent. This includes our patterns of fear. They feel solid, but they are not. They feel like part of us, but they are merely visitors. With patience and practice, they can be shown to the door. The second step is to cultivate what the Buddha called right understanding. When we turn and face our fears directly, we find that they are much smaller than we imagined. The job interview that terrified us turns out to be a conversation with another human being who is also nervous. The medical test that kept us awake at night turns out to be information that helps us take better care of ourselves. The difficult conversation we avoided for months turns out to be the doorway to deeper connection. Fear magnifies. It takes ordinary challenges and turns them into monsters. But when we bring the light of clear seeing, the monsters begin to shrink. And the third step, perhaps the most important, is to remember that we have a choice about what we place between ourselves and the world. We can place fear there. We can see every situation through the lens of what might go wrong, what might hurt us, what might be taken away. Or we can place something else. We can place openness. We can place curiosity. We can place trust in our own ability to meet whatever comes. This is the meaning of the raised palm. It is not denial of difficulty. It is a choice about how to meet it. Let us pause here for a moment. take a slow, deep breath. And when you are ready, we will continue our journey together. We have been speaking of fear as something we inherit, something placed within us by others. But there is another kind of learning that happens when we step outside the world of human concerns and enter the realm of nature. In the peaceful places of the earth, among the trees and streams and quiet meadows, we discover teachers who communicate without words. And if we are willing to listen, they show us what it means to live without fear. In certain Buddhist traditions, practitioners are encouraged to spend time living close to the natural world. They dwell in simple huts at the edge of forests. They walk paths dappled with sunlight filtering through leaves. They sit in meditation while the gentle sounds of the wild move around them, a soft symphony of bird song and flowing water and wind through branches. This practice is not about escaping from life. It is about returning to something essential. In cities, we are surrounded by urgency. The noise, the speed, the constant demands on our attention. All of this feeds our anxiety and keeps us in a state of low-level alarm. But in nature, something different happens. The trees do not rush. The streams do not worry. The birds do not lie awake at night planning tomorrow. And in their presence, we begin to remember a way of being that we had forgotten. Let us explore what it might be like to spend time in such a place. Imagine waking just before dawn. The air is soft and cool, carrying the gentle scent of pine and morning dew. Around your small dwelling, the forest is beginning to stir. A bird offers its first quiet notes, testing the silence. Another answers from somewhere deeper among the trees. Slowly, gradually, the world is waking up. You rise without hurry. There is nowhere you need to be. Nothing urgent demands your attention. You step outside and feel the cool earth beneath your feet. Above, the sky is shifting from deep blue to soft pink and gold. The stars are fading, one by one, like candles being gently extinguished. You find a place to sit, perhaps beside an old tree whose roots have been holding this same ground for 100 years. You settle into stillness, and as you grow quiet, you notice that the forest is noticing you too. At first, the creatures keep their distance. They are watching, sensing, determining whether you are safe. But as the minutes pass and you remain still, something shifts. A small bird lands on a branch nearby and regards you with bright, curious eyes. A rabbit emerges from the undergrowth and hops across the clearing, unbothered by your presence. The forest is accepting you as part of itself. This is the gift of stillness. When we stop moving, stop grasping, stop filling every moment with activity and noise, we become like water finding its level. We settle into the natural order of things, and the world around us responds with trust. A teacher who spent many years living in the forest once reflected on what those years had given him. When I first arrived, he said, I felt like a stranger. Everything was unfamiliar. The sounds, the rhythms, the way time moved so differently than it did in the world I had left behind. I did not know how to be there. I was restless, always wanting to do something, to accomplish something. He smiled softly at the memory. But the forest was patient with me. It did not demand that I change quickly. It simply continued being itself, day after day, season after season. And gradually, without my even noticing, I began to slow down. I began to breathe more deeply. I began to notice things I had never noticed before. The way light moves through leaves. The way rain sounds on different kinds of foliage. The way the whole forest seems to exhale when evening comes. What did you learn from all that noticing? Someone asked. I learned that peace is not something we have to create, he replied. It is something that is already here, always, waiting for us to stop running long enough to feel it. The forest taught me that. The trees, the streams, the creatures going about their simple lives, they were all showing me the same thing. That life can be lived gently. That we do not have to struggle so much. That there is a kind of ease available to us if we are willing to receive it. This teaching lives at the heart of the Buddha's message. As he said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The forest does not give us peace. It reminds us of the peace we already carry. Let us explore a story about a practitioner and a deer. In a small monastery nestled among gentle hills, there was a practitioner who had been struggling with restlessness. No matter how long he sat in meditation, his mind would not settle. Thoughts chased thoughts, endlessly circling. He felt like a leaf blown about by the wind, never coming to rest. One morning, feeling frustrated with his lack of progress, he left his cushion and walked out into the meadow that bordered the monastery grounds. He did not walk with purpose. He simply walked because sitting still had become unbearable. At the far end of the meadow, where the grass met a stand of ancient oaks, he stopped. And there, just a few paces away, stood a deer. The creature had been grazing quietly. Now it raised its head and looked directly at him. Its eyes were large and dark and utterly calm. There was no fear in them, no urgency, just a gentle, open attention. The practitioner stood very still. He barely breathed. He did not want to startle this beautiful creature away. For a long moment, nothing happened. The man stood. The deer stood. The morning light fell softly on the meadow grass. Somewhere, a stream was murmuring to itself. And in that stillness, something began to shift in the practitioner's heart. He realized that the deer was showing him something. This creature lived in a world full of potential dangers. There were predators who would hunt it if they could. There were storms that came without warning. There was never any guarantee of safety or comfort or enough to eat. And yet here it stood, utterly at peace, grazing in the morning light as though this moment were the only moment that had ever existed. The deer was not naive. It would run if it sensed true danger. But it did not spend its life running. It did not exhaust itself with worry about what might happen tomorrow. It simply lived, fully present, fully at ease, right here, right now. After a time, the deer returned to its grazing. The practitioner watched for a few more moments, then turned and walked slowly back to the meditation hall. When he took his seat on the cushion, something was different. The restlessness had not vanished completely, but it had loosened its grip. He had seen another way of being, and that seeing had planted a seed. The Buddha taught that we can learn wisdom from many sources if we approach life with openness. An idea that is developed and put into action is more important than an idea that exists only as an idea, he said. The deer had shown the practitioner a living truth. Now it was up to him to embody it. There is a teaching that flows through all of these forest experiences, a teaching about the relationship between our inner state and the world around us. When we are anxious, we broadcast that anxiety. It shows in the way we move, the way we hold our bodies, the energy we emanate. Other beings can sense this. Animals, certainly, but also other people. We have all had the experience of walking into a room and immediately sensing that something is wrong. That tension hangs in the air even though no one has spoken. The reverse is also true. When we are at peace, we become a source of peace for everything around us. Our calm is contagious. Our stillness creates space for others to settle. A teacher once described this using the image of a pond. Imagine you come upon a pond in the forest, he said. The water is disturbed, choppy with waves. You cannot see below the surface. Everything is murky and unclear. This is the mind in a state of fear or agitation. Now imagine that you sit beside that pond and wait. Gradually, the waves subside. The water grows still, and as it stills, it becomes clear. You can see all the way to the bottom. You can see the fish moving slowly through the depths. You can see the stones and the plants and the play of light filtering down from above. The pond has not changed, the teacher continued. It contains the same water, the same fish, the same stones. What has changed is the stillness, and that has changed everything. This is what the forest teaches. When we still ourselves, clarity arises naturally, and from that clarity, wise action becomes possible. We no longer react blindly out of fear. We respond thoughtfully from a place of calm understanding. There is an important distinction that nature helps us understand. It is the difference between fear and respect. Fear contracts us. It tightens the body and narrows the mind. It sees threat everywhere and responds with panic or avoidance. Fear does not think clearly. It does not assess situations wisely. It simply reacts, often in ways that create more problems than they solve. Respect is different. Respect acknowledges the power of something without being overwhelmed by it. Respect keeps us attentive without clouding our judgment. Respect allows us to move through the world with care and awareness, neither reckless nor paralyzed. A teacher explained it this way: you can respect the power of a river without being afraid of it. You acknowledge that the water is strong, that currents can be unpredictable, that care is needed when you swim or cross. But this respect does not fill you with dread. It simply informs your choices. You pay attention, you move wisely, and you remain at peace. This distinction matters because fear so often masquerades as wisdom. We tell ourselves that our anxiety is keeping us safe, that our worry is a form of preparation. But true wisdom does not feel like fear. It feels like clarity. It feels like calm attention. It feels like knowing what to do because you are present enough to see clearly, not because you are frightened enough to imagine every possible disaster. The creatures of the forest embody this distinction naturally. A deer grazing in a meadow is not afraid. It is simply aware. Its ears turn towards sounds. Its nose reads the wind. It is fully present, fully attentive, and fully at peace. If danger comes, it will respond. But until then, it rests in the ease of this moment. We can learn to live this way too. let us explore another story, one about a stream and the wisdom it offered to a troubled heart. There was once a woman who came to stay at a retreat center in the mountains. She had been carrying a great heaviness for many months. Worries about her family, fears about the future, regrets about the past. Her mind was like a jar of muddy water, constantly shaken, never clear. On her first morning at the retreat, she woke early and walked out into the grounds. The center was situated beside a small stream that flowed down from the hills above. She found a flat stone beside the water and sat down, not to meditate, but simply because she was tired and needed to rest. The stream moved past her with a soft, constant sound. It was not a large stream, perhaps only a few feet wide, but it flowed with quiet purpose. She watched it without thinking, letting her eyes follow the water as it moved around rocks and over small falls and through patches of sunlight and shadow. After some time, she noticed something. There was a large stone in the middle of the stream, and the water divided around it, flowing on either side. The stone did not stop the water. It did not even slow it very much. The stream simply adjusted, found a new path, and continued on its way. She watched this for a long while. The stone and the water, the obstacle and the flow. And gradually, something in her began to ease. She realized that she had been like that stone, trying to stand firm against the current of life, trying to stop things from changing, trying to control what could not be controlled. And the effort was exhausting her. What if she could be more like the water? What if, when she met an obstacle, she could simply flow around it? Not fighting, not resisting, just finding a new path and continuing on? The Buddha spoke of this kind of flexibility when he taught about impermanence. All things change, he said. All things flow. To resist this flow is to suffer. To move with it is to find peace. The woman sat by that stream for a long time that morning. When she finally rose to return to the retreat center, something had shifted in her. The worries were still there, but they did not grip her so tightly. She had seen another way, and the stream continued to flow, as it always had, teaching its wordless lesson to anyone willing to sit and listen. There is a quality that the natural world embodies, a quality that we might call effortless presence. The trees do not try to be peaceful. They simply are peaceful. The deer does not work at being graceful. Grace is simply its nature. The stream does not struggle to flow. Flowing is what water does. This effortlessness is available to us as well. We spend so much energy trying to become something, trying to improve ourselves, trying to fix what we believe is broken. But the forest whispers a different message. Perhaps there is nothing to fix. Perhaps peace is not something we need to achieve, but something we need to allow. A Zen teaching puts it this way: sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. This does not mean we should be passive or careless about our lives. It means that there is a natural unfolding available to us when we stop interfering with it. When we stop churning the water, it becomes clear on its own. When we stop grasping at peace, peace arises naturally. The creatures and plants of the forest know this instinctively. They do not overthink their existence. They do not analyze and strategize and worry themselves into exhaustion. They live. They grow. They rest. They respond to what is actually happening rather than to all the things that might happen, could happen, or once happened long ago. This is the wisdom they offer us, if we are humble enough to receive it. Let us consider one more gift that time in nature provides. It is the gift of perspective. When we are caught up in the rush of daily life, our problems can seem enormous. A disagreement with a friend feels like a catastrophe. A setback at work feels like the end of the world. Our fears and worries fill the entire sky of our awareness, leaving no room for anything else. But when we step into the forest, when we stand beneath trees that have been growing for centuries, when we look up at mountains that have been standing for millions of years, something shifts. Our problems do not disappear, but they take their proper place. They become what they actually are, small events in a vast and ancient world. This is not meant to diminish our experiences. Our joys and sorrows are real and they matter. But perspective helps us hold them more lightly. It reminds us that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, and that the difficulties of this moment are just one brushstroke in an enormous painting. A teacher once stood with his students at the edge of a great forest and said, "Look at these trees. Some of them have been here for 300 years. Think of everything that has happened in that time. Wars and peace, famines and abundance, empires rising and falling. And through it all, these trees have simply stood here, growing quietly, offering shade and shelter, dropping their leaves each autumn and growing new ones each spring." He paused and let the silence settle. "Your worries feel urgent," he continued. "Your fears feel pressing. But from the perspective of these trees, they are like clouds passing across the sky. They come, they change shape, they drift away. The sky remains, the trees remain, and you, the awareness that witnesses all of this, you remain too. Beneath the clouds, beneath the changing weather of your emotions, there is something in you that is as steady as these ancient trees. This perspective does not come from thinking. It comes from direct experience. It comes from sitting quietly in the presence of old trees and still water. It comes from letting the peace of the natural world seep into your bones. There is another lesson the forest offers, one that comes not from the animals, but from the trees themselves. Consider what it means to be a tree. You are rooted in one place. You cannot run from difficulty or chase after pleasure. Whatever comes, you must meet it exactly where you stand. The storms, the droughts, the long cold winters, the blazing summers, all of it moves through you, and you remain. And yet trees do not suffer the way we do. They do not spend the summer dreading the winter. They do not look at other trees and wish they were taller or had more leaves. They simply grow, season by season, ring by ring, becoming more fully themselves with each passing year. There is a peace in this that we can learn from. So much of our suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are. We resist the present moment. We argue with reality. We exhaust ourselves pushing against circumstances we cannot change. The trees show another way. They accept what is. They adapt to their conditions. They find a way to grow toward the light, no matter what obstacles stand in their path. And they do all of this without struggle, without complaint, without fear. The great Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote, "Walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet, This is the spirit of the forest. Gentle presence, humble connection, a way of being that does not fight against life, but moves with it, like water flowing around stones. As you rest now, perhaps you can carry something of the forest with you into sleep. Imagine yourself in a peaceful grove. The trees stand tall around you, their leaves rustling softly overhead. Sunlight filters through, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. The air is fresh and clean. Somewhere nearby, you can hear the gentle sound of water moving over stones. You are safe here. The forest holds you the way it holds all living things, with patience and acceptance and quiet care. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to figure out. You can simply be, the way the trees simply are, the way the deer simply is, the way the stream simply flows. Let your breath become like the wind through leaves. Let your body become soft like moss. Let your mind settle like a still pond, clear and calm and reflective. The forest is always here, waiting for you. Even when you are far from any wild place, you can close your eyes and return to this grove. You can feel the peace that lives beneath all the noise and hurry of the world. You can remember what it is to be still. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel yourself held by the quiet. Take one slow breath, then another. And when you are ready, we will continue our journey together. We have been resting in the peace of the natural world, learning from trees and streams and gentle creatures. Now let us turn our attention inward to a different kind of wilderness, the landscape of the heart, where old wounds live and where healing becomes possible. There is a particular kind of fear that many of us carry, one that is so familiar we barely notice it anymore. It is the fear of punishment. The fear that if we make a mistake, if we fall short, if we reveal our imperfections, something terrible will happen to us. We will be rejected. We will be shamed. We will suffer consequences that feel unbearable. This fear often begins in childhood, when we first learn that certain behaviors bring approval and others bring displeasure. We learn to watch the faces of those around us, looking for signs of acceptance or disapproval. We learn to hide the parts of ourselves that seem unacceptable. We learn, in subtle and not so subtle ways, that love is conditional, that we must earn it through good behavior, that we can lose it through failure. And so we grow up with a voice inside us, a harsh inner critic that watches everything we do and judges it. This voice tells us we are not good enough. It reminds us of every mistake we have ever made. It warns us that if we are not vigilant, if we do not punish ourselves for our shortcomings, something even worse will happen. This voice feels like it is protecting us, but it is not. It is keeping us trapped in fear. The Buddha understood this pattern deeply. He saw how beings everywhere were caught in cycles of self-judgment and self-punishment, how they carried guilt and shame like heavy stones, how they believed that suffering was what they deserved. And he offered a different way. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection, he taught. This was revolutionary then, and it remains revolutionary now. The idea that we might treat ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a dear friend. The idea that compassion is not just for others, but for ourselves as well. This teaching does not mean we ignore our mistakes or pretend we have not caused harm. It means we learn from our errors without crushing ourselves beneath the weight of endless self-criticism. It means we find a way to grow that does not depend on fear. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived a community of practitioners devoted to the contemplative life. Some had been there for many years. Others were just beginning their journey. All of them were learning, step by step, how to live with greater awareness and peace. Among the newcomers was a young man who had recently arrived to begin his training. He had left behind a busy life in the city, a life filled with noise and distraction and the constant pressure to achieve. He had come to the monastery seeking something different. Simplicity, stillness, a chance to discover who he was beneath all the roles he had been playing. The training was gentle but structured. There were periods of meditation, periods of work, periods of study. There were guidelines to follow, not as rigid rules but as supports for the contemplative life. One of these guidelines concerned food. The practitioners ate their main meal in the late morning, and after noon they refrained from solid food until the following day. This was an ancient practice, designed to support clarity of mind and lightness of body. The young man understood the purpose of this guideline and was committed to following it. But one afternoon, several weeks into his training, something happened. He had been working in the garden all morning, and the physical labor had left him hungry. Really hungry. The kind of hunger that makes it hard to think about anything else. He returned to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and there on the counter sat a loaf of bread that had been left out from the morning meal. He stood there for a moment, looking at the bread. He knew he was not supposed to eat it. He knew the guideline he had agreed to follow. But the hunger was so strong, and the bread was right there, and no one was watching. Before he quite knew what he was doing, he had made himself a sandwich and eaten it. Immediately, he felt terrible. Not because the bread had harmed him, but because he had broken his commitment. He had failed. He had proven himself unworthy of the training he had undertaken. For the rest of the day, the young man could think of nothing else. The sandwich sat in his stomach like a stone. The guilt sat in his heart even heavier. By evening, he knew what he had to do. He had to confess. The abbot of this monastery was an older practitioner, someone who had spent decades walking the path of awakening. He was known for his wisdom, his patience, and his gentle humor. People came to him with all manner of troubles, and he received each one with the same quiet attention. When the young man knocked on his door that evening, the abbot invited him in and gestured to a cushion on the floor. "What brings you here?" he asked. The young man could barely meet his eyes. "I have done something terrible," he said. "I have committed a serious offense. I understand if you need to send me away." The abbot's expression did not change. He simply waited. "This afternoon," the young man continued, his voice tight with shame, "I went into the kitchen, and I made myself a sandwich, and I ate it. I know I was not supposed to eat after noon. I know I broke the guideline. I am so sorry." He fell silent, waiting for the judgment he was certain would come. The abbot regarded him for a long moment. Then, very gently, he smiled. "Thank you for telling me," he said. That took courage. The young man looked up, confused. This was not the response he had expected. "It sounds like you were very hungry," the abbot continued. Perhaps you did not eat enough at the morning meal. Next time, make sure you take a larger portion. And if you find yourself hungry in the afternoon, you are welcome to have some tea with honey or some fruit juice. These are permitted and will help you feel more comfortable. He paused, letting the words settle. You made a mistake. You have acknowledged it. Now you can learn from it and move on. There is nothing more to be done. The young man stared at him. Something was wrong. This was too easy, too gentle. It did not match the severity of what he had done. I am sorry, he said, but that is not good enough. Now it was the abbot's turn to look surprised. Not good enough? If you do not punish me, the young man said, I will do it again. I know myself. I need consequences. I need a penance. The abbot sat with this for a moment, recognizing something important. This young man had been trained, somewhere in his past, to believe that only punishment could change behavior. Only fear could keep him in line. Without the threat of consequences, he did not trust himself to do the right thing. This was not a flaw in the young man. It was a wound. A very common wound, one that many people carry without even knowing it. The abbot thought about how to respond. He wanted to honor the young man's request while also offering a different kind of teaching. A teaching about kindness. A teaching about trust. An idea came to him. Very well, he said. If you feel you need a penance, I will give you one. The young man straightened, ready to receive his punishment. In this monastery, the abbot said, we have 3 cats. Have you seen them? The young man nodded, uncertain where this was going. The cats were a familiar presence around the grounds, soft creatures who spent their days sleeping in patches of sunlight and accepting affection from anyone who offered it. Your penance is this, the abbot said. You must find one of these cats. Sit down beside it and stroke it 50 times. Gently, with kindness. 50 strokes of the cat. The young man's eyes went wide. He had been expecting something harsh, something painful. Not this. While you stroke the cat, the abbot continued, I want you to pay attention to what you are feeling. Notice what it is like to offer gentleness. Notice what it is like to receive the cat's trust. And consider this. Perhaps kindness is a more powerful teacher than punishment has ever been. The young man left the abbot's room in a daze. He was not sure what had just happened. He had come seeking punishment and had been given something else entirely. Something he did not quite understand. He found one of the cats in the garden, a grey and white creature who was dozing beneath a flowering bush. He sat down beside it, and the cat opened one eye, regarded him with sleepy curiosity, then began to purr. He started to stroke the soft fur. 1 stroke, 2, 3. At first, he felt awkward. This was not what penance was supposed to feel like. Where was the suffering? Where was the pain that would cleanse him of his wrongdoing? But as he continued, something began to shift. 10 strokes, 15, 20. The cat stretched luxuriously, leaning into his hand. The purring grew louder, and the young man noticed that something in his chest was beginning to soften. The tight knot of guilt that had been sitting there all day was starting to loosen. 30 strokes, 35, 40. He thought about what the abbot had said. That kindness might be a more powerful teacher than punishment. He thought about all the times he had punished himself for his failures, all the harsh words he had directed inward, all the ways he had tried to whip himself into being a better person. Had it ever worked? Had the self-criticism ever made him kinder, wiser, more at peace? 45 strokes. 48. 49. 50. He sat there with the cat for a long while after the penance was complete. The evening light was soft and golden. The garden was quiet, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt something that might have been self-compassion stirring in his heart. This story carries a teaching that goes to the very root of our relationship with fear. So many of us have been trained by punishment. As children, we learned that mistakes led to consequences. We learned to fear the anger of those who had power over us. We learned that the way to be good was to be afraid of being bad. And this training goes deep. Even when the external punishers are long gone, we internalize them. We become our own harsh judges, our own cruel disciplinarians. We punish ourselves for every imperfection, believing that this is the only way to improve. But the Buddha saw through this pattern. He recognized that fear-based training creates fear-based people. It may produce compliance, but it does not produce peace. It may prevent certain behaviors, but it does not transform the heart. What transforms the heart is love. What heals the deep wounds of unworthiness is compassion. What teaches us to be truly good, not out of fear but out of genuine care, is kindness. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love, the Buddha taught. This is the eternal rule. The same is true within ourselves. Self-hatred does not lead to self-improvement. Self-punishment does not lead to growth. Only self-compassion, only the gentle patience we might offer a struggling friend, can truly help us change. There is another dimension to this teaching worth exploring. It concerns the relationship between trust and growth. When we are raised with punishment, we learn not to trust ourselves. We come to believe that without external consequences, without someone watching and judging and correcting, we will inevitably go astray. We see ourselves as fundamentally flawed, requiring constant supervision and correction. But this belief is itself a prison. As long as we do not trust ourselves, we can never be truly free. We remain dependent on others to keep us in line, or we become our own jailers, watching ourselves with suspicious eyes, ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. The abbot in our story understood this. When he gave the young man a penance of kindness rather than punishment, he was doing something radical. He was saying, in effect, I trust you. I trust that you want to do well. I trust that you can learn from this experience without being harmed. And I invite you to begin trusting yourself in the same way. This trust is not naive. It does not ignore the reality that we sometimes make poor choices, that we sometimes act in ways that cause harm. But it holds these realities within a larger faith in human goodness. It believes that when we are met with understanding rather than condemnation, something in us rises to meet that understanding. We become more, not less, capable of positive change. Let us explore a small parable that illuminates this truth. There once lived two gardeners who each tended a plot of land. The first gardener was harsh and critical. When a plant did not grow as expected, he would pull it up by the roots in frustration. When weeds appeared, he would attack them with fury, often damaging the surrounding flowers in his anger. He believed that only through strict discipline could a garden thrive. The second gardener was gentle and patient. When a plant struggled, she would examine it with curiosity, asking what it needed. More water? Less sun? Different soil? She would make adjustments slowly, giving the plant time to respond. When weeds appeared, she would remove them carefully, taking care not to disturb what she wanted to grow. She believed that a garden thrives through attentive care. After many seasons, visitors would come to see both gardens. The first gardener's plot was sparse and struggling. Many plants had been torn out before they could mature. The soil was compacted from heavy footsteps and harsh treatment. Little wanted to grow there. The second gardener's plot was lush and abundant. Flowers bloomed in profusion. Vegetables grew strong and healthy. Bees and butterflies made it their home. The garden had become a place of beauty and life. We are each the gardener of our own inner landscape. The way we treat ourselves determines what can grow within us. Harshness produces barren soil. Kindness creates the conditions for flourishing. Let us sit with this teaching for a moment and consider how it might apply to our own lives. Think of something you have been criticizing yourself for. It might be something recent or something from long ago. It might be a mistake you made, a goal you failed to achieve, a way you fell short of your own expectations. Notice how you have been speaking to yourself about this. Notice the tone of your inner voice. Is it harsh? Impatient? Unforgiving? Now imagine a different response. Imagine speaking to yourself the way that wise abbot spoke to the young man, with gentleness, with understanding, with the recognition that you are a human being who is doing your best, even when your best is imperfect. You made a mistake. You have acknowledged it. Now you can learn from it and move on. There is nothing more to be done. Feel what happens in your body when you offer yourself this kind of message. Does something soften? Does some tension begin to release? This is the power of self-compassion. It does not ignore our failures or pretend they do not matter. It simply holds them in a larger space, a space of understanding and kindness. And in that space, real growth becomes possible. There is a practice in Buddhism called metta, often translated as loving kindness. It involves deliberately cultivating feelings of warmth and goodwill, first toward ourselves, then toward others, and eventually toward all beings everywhere. The practice often begins with phrases like these: "May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. May I live with ease." Notice that it begins with ourselves. This is not selfishness. It is foundation. We cannot genuinely offer to others what we have not first cultivated within. If we are at war with ourselves, we will bring that war into all our relationships. If we are at peace with ourselves, we will bring that peace. The young man in the story had been at war with himself for a long time. He had learned to treat his own failures as crimes deserving punishment. The abbot offered him a different way, a way of peace, a way of gentleness, a way of stroking the soft fur of self-compassion until the habit of self-punishment began to dissolve. This is available to all of us. Right now, in this moment, we can begin to treat ourselves with kindness. We can notice when the harsh inner voice arises and meet it with something softer. We can offer ourselves the same patience we would offer a child who is learning to walk, who falls down again and again, and who needs encouragement rather than criticism. The Buddha taught that all beings want to be happy. All beings want to be free from suffering. This includes you. This includes me. This includes everyone who has ever made a mistake, which is to say, everyone who has ever lived. Let us return to the image of the young man in the garden, sitting with the cat as evening falls. He came to the monastery carrying a heavy burden, the burden of perfectionism, the burden of never being good enough, the burden of believing that he had to earn his place in the world through flawless performance, and that any failure proved his fundamental unworthiness. Many of us carry this same burden. We may not be aware of it, but it shapes everything we do. It makes us afraid to try new things because we might fail. It makes us defensive when we receive feedback because any criticism confirms our worst fears about ourselves. It makes us exhausted because we are constantly trying to prove that we deserve to exist. The abbot offered the young man a key to setting this burden down, not through force or effort, but through gentleness, through the simple act of stroking a cat and letting kindness work its quiet magic. We can offer ourselves the same key. We can begin, right now, to treat ourselves as we would treat a beloved friend. We can speak to ourselves with warmth. We can acknowledge our struggles with compassion. We can remember that we are worthy of love, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we are alive. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Let these words sink in. Let them soften something that has been hard for too long. Let them begin to heal the old wounds of unworthiness that so many of us carry. Before we close this chapter of our journey, let us consider one more aspect of this teaching. The young man in the story came to the monastery carrying not just guilt about a sandwich, but a lifetime of conditioning. He had learned, as so many of us have learned, that he was not quite good enough, that he needed to work harder, try harder, be harder on himself. That relaxation was laziness. That self-acceptance was self-indulgence. These beliefs are so common in our culture that we rarely question them. We praise people for being hard on themselves. We admire those who push past their limits. We view self-compassion with suspicion, as though kindness toward oneself is somehow cheating. But the Buddha saw things differently. He saw that this endless striving often comes from a place of fear and unworthiness. It is not a path to genuine growth, but a treadmill of anxiety that never reaches a destination. No matter how much we achieve, it is never enough. No matter how hard we work, we still feel inadequate. The alternative is not laziness or complacency. The alternative is what the Buddha called the middle way, a path that is neither harsh nor indulgent, a path that honors our genuine aspiration to grow, while treating ourselves with kindness along the journey. The young man did not become careless about his commitments after his encounter with the abbot. In fact, the opposite happened. Because he was met with understanding rather than punishment, he felt more connected to the community and more motivated to honor its guidelines. He ate a larger breakfast. He prepared for the afternoon with tea and fruit juice, and he never needed to confess about a sandwich again. This is the paradox of self-compassion. When we are kind to ourselves, we do not become worse. We become better. When we release the fear of punishment, we do not run wild. We settle into a deeper, more authentic goodness. Let us pause here for a moment. Let your breath be soft. Let your body be at ease. And when you are ready, we will continue our journey together. We have been exploring the landscape of self-compassion, discovering that kindness transforms us in ways that punishment never could. Now let us go deeper still, into the very heart of how fear works within us. For there is a truth about fear that, once seen, can change everything. It is this: so often, the thing we are afraid of is brought about by the fear itself. This may sound strange at first. We tend to think of fear as a response to danger, a natural and helpful reaction that keeps us safe. And sometimes it is. But far more often than we realize, fear creates the very conditions it warns us against. It becomes a kind of prophecy that fulfills itself. The Buddha understood this deeply. He saw how beings, caught in cycles of anxiety and dread, would make choices that led them directly into the suffering they were trying to avoid. He saw how a mind clouded by fear cannot see clearly, cannot act wisely, cannot find the path through difficulty that would otherwise be available. There is no fear for one whose mind is not filled with desires, he taught. When we cling tightly to how things must be, when we are desperate to avoid certain outcomes, we create the very tension that makes those outcomes more likely. Let us explore this through a story. It is a tale that has been told in many forms across many traditions, for it speaks to something universal in the human experience. Listen now, and let the teaching unfold gently. In a monastery devoted to the training of the mind, there lived a wise teacher and many students. The students came from all walks of life, drawn by a desire to understand themselves more deeply and to find peace in a world that often felt chaotic and threatening. The training at this monastery was thorough and gradual. Students learned to sit in stillness. They learned to watch their thoughts without being carried away by them. They learned the subtle art of being present, fully here, not lost in regrets about the past or worries about the future. But there was one final teaching that the teacher reserved for those who had progressed far along the path. It was a teaching that could not be conveyed through words alone. It had to be experienced directly, in the body, in the moment, in a way that would never be forgotten. Among the students was a young person who had been at the monastery for several years. This student was sincere and dedicated, quick to learn, eager to understand. The teacher had watched this one grow and knew that the time had come for the final teaching. One morning, the teacher approached the student and said, "Today, you will learn something that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Come with me." They walked together through the monastery grounds, past the meditation hall, past the garden, to a small building that the student had noticed but never entered. It was always kept locked, and the student had assumed it was simply a storage shed of some kind. The teacher produced a key and opened the door. Inside, it was dim, lit only by a few candles. As the student's eyes adjusted, a strange sight emerged from the shadows. In the center of the room was a pool of water. It was perfectly still, perfectly dark, reflecting the candlelight like a mirror made of black glass. The student could not see the bottom. The water might have been inches deep or fathoms deep. There was no way to tell. Stretching across the pool, from one side of the room to the other, was a narrow wooden plank. "What do you see?" the teacher asked. "A pool," the student replied, "and a plank across it." "This pool is deeper than it appears," the teacher said, voice soft and serious. "The water is very cold. Those who fall in find it difficult to climb out. The shock of the cold, the disorientation in the darkness. It is not dangerous, but it is deeply unpleasant. Many students who have attempted this crossing have fallen in." The student felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "Your task," the teacher continued, "is to walk across that plank, from this side to the other. It is the same width as planks you have walked across many times. There is nothing physically difficult about it. But first, you must practice." They left the dim room and went outside, where the morning sun was warm and bright. There, in the courtyard, lay another plank, identical to the one over the pool. It rested on two low supports, just a hand's width above the ground. "Practice here," the teacher said. "Walk back and forth until you can do it without thought. You have 7 days, then you will cross the pool." The student began to practice. At first, it seemed almost too easy. The plank was narrow, but not impossibly so. With a little attention to balance, walking across it was simple. By the end of the first day, the student could cross without wobbling. By the end of the third day, the crossing felt as natural as walking on solid ground. But as the days passed and the final test approached, something began to change. The student started thinking about the pool, that dark, still water, the cold that waited beneath the surface, the stories of others who had fallen. What had felt easy in the sunlit courtyard began to feel ominous. The plank that had seemed so manageable now seemed narrower. The balance that had come so naturally now felt precarious. By the 6th day, the student was struggling to complete a single crossing without wobbling. The body that had been relaxed and confident was now tense and uncertain. Fear had entered, and it was undoing all the progress that had been made. On the morning of the 7th day, the teacher came to collect the student. "It is time." They walked together to the small building. The teacher unlocked the door. The candles had been lit, and the pool waited in the shadows, dark and still, and somehow menacing. The student stood at the edge of the plank and looked across. It was the same distance as in the courtyard, the same width, the same wood beneath the feet. Nothing had changed except what was below. "Whenever you are ready," the teacher said. The student took a breath and stepped onto the plank. Immediately, everything felt different. The body that had been trained over 7 days seemed to have forgotten everything it had learned. The legs trembled. The arms reached out for balance that was not there. Each step forward felt like a battle against invisible forces. The student made it a quarter of the way across. Then halfway, the middle of the pool was the worst, where the distance to safety seemed equally impossible in both directions. The water below was so dark. The air in the room felt thick and heavy. 3/4 of the way. Almost there. Just a few more steps. And then, a wobble. A correction. An overcorrection. And the sickening feeling of balance lost beyond recovery. The student fell. There was a moment of terror as the body dropped toward that dark water. A moment when the mind screamed that everything was about to go very wrong. And then the student hit the water. It was not cold. It was pleasantly warm, like a bath that had been drawn just for this purpose. And it was not deep. The student's feet touched bottom almost immediately. The water came up only to the waist. The student stood there, dripping and confused, as the teacher began to laugh. It was not a mocking laugh. It was the warm, delighted laugh of someone watching a beloved student finally understand something important. The teacher walked to the edge of the pool and looked down with twinkling eyes. "The water is warm," the teacher said. "It has always been warm. And it is shallow. You could stand in it comfortably all day. There was never any danger. There was never any reason to fear." The student stared up, not yet comprehending. "So why did I fall?" The student asked. "Fear pushed you in," the teacher said gently. "Fear, and only fear. You walked that plank perfectly for 7 days. Your body knew exactly what to do. But when you believed there was danger below you, your mind created the very failure it was trying to prevent. Your muscles tensed when they needed to be relaxed. Your attention scattered when it needed to be focused. Fear pushed you in." The student stood in the warm water, letting this truth sink in. "This is the lesson," the teacher continued. "Not about planks or pools, but about life itself. So much of what we fear is like this water. We imagine it cold and deep and dangerous. We fill our minds with terrifying possibilities. And that very fear makes us stumble, makes us fall, makes us create the outcomes we dreaded." This story points to something essential about the nature of fear. When we are afraid, we do not function well. Our bodies tighten. Our breathing becomes shallow. Our vision narrows until we can see only the threat, missing all the resources and possibilities that surround it. We lose access to our natural grace, our innate wisdom, our ability to respond skillfully to whatever is actually happening. The student in the story had genuine skill. 7 days of practice had trained the body to walk that plank with ease. But fear overwhelmed that training. It flooded the system with tension and doubt, and in that flooded state, what had been easy became impossible. How often does this happen in our own lives? We prepare carefully for an important conversation, but when the moment comes, anxiety makes us forget everything we wanted to say. We practice a skill until it feels natural, but when we perform in front of others, nervousness makes us clumsy. We know how to handle a situation. We have handled similar situations many times before, but fear convinces us that this time is different. This time we will fail. And sometimes, because of that fear, we do fail. Not because we lacked ability, but because fear itself got in the way. There is a Zen saying, "The obstacle is the path." This sounds paradoxical, but the story of the pool helps us understand. The student thought the obstacle was the pool, that dark water waiting to receive anyone who stumbled. But the real obstacle was never the water. It was the fear of the water. And that fear was not something external that had to be overcome. It was something internal that had to be seen clearly and released. When we can see our fear for what it is, when we can recognize that it is distorting our perception and undermining our capacity, something shifts. We do not have to fight the fear or push through it with brute force. We simply have to see it. And in the seeing, it begins to loosen its grip. The Buddha spoke of this when he described right understanding, the first element of the path to liberation. Right understanding is not about believing certain doctrines or memorizing certain teachings. It is about seeing clearly, seeing ourselves clearly, seeing our patterns clearly, seeing the way our minds create suffering and the way they can also create freedom. When the student fell into the pool and discovered warm, shallow water instead of cold darkness, a kind of right understanding arose. The fear that had seemed so solid, so justified, so real, was revealed to be based on imagination, not reality. And once that was seen, it could never be unseen. Let us sit with this teaching for a moment and consider how it might apply to the fears we carry. Think of something you are worried about. It might be something specific, like an upcoming event or a difficult decision. Or it might be something more general, a persistent anxiety that colors your days. Now ask yourself, how much of this fear is based on what is actually happening, and how much is based on what I imagine might happen? This is not to dismiss your concerns. Some fears point to genuine situations that need attention. But often, when we look closely, we find that our minds have taken a small kernel of uncertainty and built around it an elaborate structure of worst-case scenarios. We have filled the pool with imaginary cold and imaginary depth, and then we stand trembling at the edge, afraid to take a single step. What if the water is warm? What if it is shallow? What if the thing you fear is not nearly as terrible as you have imagined? And even if some difficulty does await you, what if your fear of it is making things worse? What if the tension you carry, the sleepless nights you endure, the energy you spend on worry are actually creating more problems than the original situation ever could? The Buddha said, "We are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think." When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. Fear is a kind of thought. It is a way of relating to the future that assumes the worst and prepares for disaster. But this preparation is not neutral. It shapes us. It becomes a lens through which we see everything. And what we see through that lens is a world of threat and danger, even when warmth and safety are close at hand. There is another dimension to this teaching worth exploring. It concerns the relationship between fear and the things we fear. Many people have noticed that the things they worry about most often do not come to pass. We spend countless hours dreading possibilities that never materialize. The meeting we feared goes smoothly. The health concern turns out to be nothing. The relationship difficulty resolves itself naturally. But there is a more subtle pattern as well. Sometimes the things we fear do happen, but they happen precisely because we feared them. Consider relationships. When we are afraid of being abandoned, we often behave in ways that push people away. We become clingy or controlling or suspicious. We interpret innocent actions as evidence of betrayal. Our fear creates the very distance we were trying to prevent. Or consider performance. When we are afraid of failing, we often hold back from giving our full effort. We hedge our bets. We protect ourselves from the pain of trying our best and falling short. And that holding back ensures that we will never discover what we are truly capable of. The student in the story did not fall because the plank was difficult. The student fell because fear made the easy difficult. Fear tightened the muscles that needed to be relaxed. Fear scattered the attention that needed to be focused. Fear whispered, "You will fall, you will fall," until the body had no choice but to obey. This is the self-fulfilling nature of fear. It does not just anticipate negative outcomes, it helps create them. So how do we break this cycle? How do we step onto the plank without fear pushing us in? The first step is awareness. Simply recognizing the pattern. When we can see that our fear is making things worse, not better, something begins to shift. We are no longer completely identified with the fear. We have created a little space, a little perspective from which to observe it. The second step is investigation, looking closely at what we actually fear, not the vague cloud of anxiety, but the specific concerns beneath it. What exactly am I afraid will happen? How likely is that? How would I actually cope if it did happen? Often, this investigation reveals that our fears are exaggerated. The cold, deep pool turns out to be warm and shallow. But even when genuine difficulties exist, investigation helps us see them clearly, without the distortion of panic, and that clarity allows us to respond more skillfully. The third step is what we might call gentle courage, not forcing ourselves to ignore our fears or pretending they do not exist, but moving forward anyway, gently, one small step at a time. The student could not avoid falling the first time, but imagine returning to that plank, knowing now that the water is warm, knowing that falling is not disaster. The second crossing would be different, easier, more peaceful. We can approach our own fears in this way. We can acknowledge them, understand them, and then gently step forward anyway. Not because we have no fear, but because we have seen that fear is not a reliable guide to reality. There is a beautiful teaching in the Buddhist tradition about the two arrows. The Buddha said that when we experience something unpleasant, it is like being struck by an arrow. The pain is real. The difficulty is genuine. This is the first arrow, and it cannot be avoided. To live is to sometimes encounter pain. But then, the Buddha said, we often shoot ourselves with a second arrow. This is the arrow of our reaction to the pain. Our resistance, our fear, our anger at the fact that we are hurting. This second arrow causes far more suffering than the first, and it is entirely self-inflicted. Fear is very often this second arrow. Something uncertain lies ahead, and we cannot know how it will unfold. This is the first arrow, the natural discomfort of not knowing. But then we add to it elaborate stories of disaster. We lose sleep. We snap at loved ones. We make ourselves sick with worry. All of this is the second arrow, and it is this second arrow that causes most of our suffering. The practice is not to avoid the first arrow. That is not possible. The practice is to stop shooting ourselves with the second. When we notice fear arising, we can pause. We can breathe. We can ask ourselves, is this fear helping me, or is it just causing more pain? Is it pointing me towards something I need to address, or is it simply adding suffering on top of uncertainty? Sometimes fear is useful information. It tells us to look both ways before crossing the street. It tells us to prepare for an important event. It tells us to take care with something that matters. But very often, fear is just the second arrow. It is unnecessary suffering piled on top of the ordinary challenges of being alive. And when we can see this, we can begin to set the bow down. We can stop shooting ourselves. We can meet life's difficulties with the first arrow only, which is hard enough, without adding all the extra pain we have been adding. Let us explore a smaller story that shows this teaching in everyday life. There was once a woman who had to give a presentation at her workplace. She had given many presentations before. She knew her material well. By all reasonable measures, she was prepared. But as the day approached, fear began to take hold. She lay awake at night imagining everything that could go wrong. Her voice might shake. She might forget what she wanted to say. Her colleagues might judge her. Her supervisor might be disappointed. The more she worried, the worse she felt. Her sleep became fragmented. Her appetite disappeared. The confidence she normally felt seemed to have evaporated completely. By the morning of the presentation, she was exhausted and anxious, a shadow of her usual capable self. And then something happened. Just before she was to begin, she took a moment to step outside. She stood in the fresh air and asked herself a simple question. What am I actually afraid of? When she looked closely, she saw that her fears were vague and exaggerated. She was afraid of embarrassment, but she had survived embarrassment before. She was afraid of judgment, but she knew her colleagues respected her. She was afraid of failure, but even if this presentation went badly, it would not be the end of her career or her life. The pool, she realized, was not as cold or as deep as she had been imagining. Something shifted in that moment. She did not become fearless. The nervousness was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. She could see it for what it was, just anxiety, not truth, and she could step forward anyway. The presentation went well. Not perfectly, but well enough. And afterwards, she reflected on how much suffering she had caused herself in the days of worry beforehand. All those sleepless hours, all that dread. And for what? The thing she feared had not happened, and even if it had, she would have survived it. This is how we learn. Not by never feeling fear, but by seeing through it, again and again, until we no longer believe everything it tells us. There is a practice in some Buddhist traditions called making friends with fear. This might sound strange. Why would we want to befriend something so unpleasant? But the practice points to something important. When we fight against our fear, when we try to push it away or pretend it does not exist, we often make it stronger. What we resist persists, as the saying goes. But when we turn toward fear with gentleness and curiosity, something different happens. We begin to see that fear is not a monster. It is more like a frightened child, crying out for reassurance. It is a part of us that is trying, in its confused way, to keep us safe. When we can hold our fear with compassion, as we might hold a scared child, it begins to calm. It does not need to shout so loudly to be heard. It can deliver its message and then rest, trusting that we have received the information and will respond wisely. The teacher in our story did not mock the student for falling into the pool. The teacher laughed with delight, not derision. This is the spirit of making friends with fear. We do not judge ourselves for being afraid. We do not add shame on top of anxiety. We simply see the fear, acknowledge it, and gently show it that the water is warm. Let us return to the image of the student standing in the warm water, looking up at the smiling teacher. In that moment, something shifted forever. The student understood, in a way that could never be forgotten, that fear itself had been the only enemy. The pool was not dangerous. The plank was not impossible. The only thing that had ever been working against the student was the student's own mind, spinning stories of disaster that had no basis in reality. This understanding is available to us as well, not as an intellectual concept, but as a lived experience that changes how we relate to difficulty. We can begin to approach our fears with curiosity rather than dread. We can ask, is this pool really as cold as I imagine? Is it really as deep? What if I have been frightening myself with phantoms, tensing against dangers that exist only in my mind? And we can begin to trust ourselves more. The student had real skill, earned through practice. That skill did not disappear when fear arose. It was simply overwhelmed. When the fear is seen through, the skill returns. We remember that we know how to walk, how to balance, how to meet challenges with grace. You have done difficult things before. You have faced uncertainty and found your way through. You have resources, inner and outer, that fear makes you forget. They are still there, waiting for you to remember them. As you rest now, let your body soften around whatever fears you may be carrying. You do not need to resolve them tonight. You do not need to figure everything out. You can simply rest, like the student who discovered that the water was warm all along. Perhaps some of the pools you have been dreading are not as cold as you imagine. Perhaps the depths you fear are shallower than they appear. And perhaps, when morning comes, you will see things a little more clearly. For now, there is only this breath, this body, this gentle darkness. The student climbed out of the warm pool and stood dripping in the candlelight, understanding something that would never be forgotten. Fear had been the only obstacle. The plank had been walkable all along. May this teaching settle into you like water finding its level. May it be there when you need it, a quiet reminder that so much of what we dread exists only in the mind. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel the warmth surrounding you. Let your breath flow easily. And when you are ready, we will continue our journey together. There is a hidden truth, one that most of us would rather not examine. It is this: we are, in a strange way, addicted to fear. We have become so accustomed to anxiety that stillness feels foreign. We have lived with worry for so long that peace makes us uneasy. And so, even when life offers us rest, we find ways to stir up trouble in our own minds. This may sound like a harsh judgment, but it is offered with compassion. We did not choose this addiction consciously. It grew in us over many years, fed by a culture that celebrates busyness and views contentment with suspicion. Understanding this pattern is not about blame. It is about freedom. For once we see clearly how we create our own suffering, we gain the power to make a different choice. Consider how restless the human mind tends to be. We sit down to rest, and within moments the mind is elsewhere, planning tomorrow, reviewing yesterday, constructing imaginary conversations, worrying about problems that may never arise. The body may be still, but the mind races on, unable or unwilling to simply be here, now, at peace. The Buddha observed this tendency with great precision. He called it the monkey mind, always swinging from branch to branch, never content to rest in one place. This restlessness is not a flaw in certain individuals. It is a feature of the untrained human mind, something we all share. But there is a particular flavor of restlessness that concerns us here. It is the tendency to fill peaceful moments with worry, to take a quiet evening and populate it with anxious thoughts, to lie in bed, body tired and ready for sleep, while the mind insists on reviewing every concern it can find. Why do we do this? What possible benefit could there be in trading peace for anxiety? One answer lies in the strange comfort of the familiar. We are creatures of habit, and our habits extend to our emotional states. If we have spent years living with a certain level of background anxiety, that anxiety becomes our normal. It is what we know. It is, in a peculiar way, where we feel at home. Peace, by contrast, can feel unfamiliar, empty, even threatening. When the usual hum of worry falls silent, we may feel lost. We may not know who we are without something to be concerned about. And so, almost automatically, we reach for a new worry to fill the void. There is a story about a prisoner who spent many years in a small cell. When he was finally released, he found the open world overwhelming. The vast sky, the endless choices, the absence of walls. After a few days of freedom, he committed a small crime just so he could return to prison. The cell had become his home. He no longer knew how to live without it. This story is not meant to mock the prisoner. It is meant to illuminate something in all of us. We build prisons of worry and then forget that we hold the key. We become so accustomed to our anxious thoughts that we feel lost without them. Freedom is available, but we are not sure we want it. There is another dimension to this pattern, one that goes even deeper. Many of us carry, somewhere in our hearts, a belief that we do not deserve to be at peace. We have absorbed messages, perhaps from childhood, perhaps from the broader culture, that rest must be earned. That happiness is for those who have accomplished enough, suffered enough, proven themselves enough. Until then, we must keep striving, keep worrying, keep our guard up. This belief rarely announces itself directly. It operates in the shadows, shaping our choices without our awareness. When peace begins to arise, something in us whispers that it is too soon, that we have not done enough to deserve this, that if we relax now, something bad will surely happen. And so we sabotage our own contentment. We find something new to worry about. We pick at old wounds. We remind ourselves of all the ways we have fallen short. The peace that was beginning to bloom gets trampled before it can take root. The Buddha addressed this directly when he taught that all beings deserve compassion, including ourselves. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This teaching is radical precisely because so many of us do not believe it. We extend kindness to others while withholding it from ourselves. We grant others the right to rest while denying it to ourselves. There is yet another layer to our addiction to worry, and it may be the most subtle of all. We sometimes use worry as a way of feeling alive. When life is calm and uneventful, something in us can feel bored, flat, unstimulated, and in that flatness, we may reach for worry as a kind of excitement. The mind, hungry for activity, seizes on problems to solve, dangers to anticipate, scenarios to imagine. At least then something is happening. At least then we feel engaged with life. This pattern is more common than we might think. How many times have you noticed yourself manufacturing concerns when things were going well? How many times have you taken a peaceful moment and filled it with thoughts of what could go wrong? This is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that the mind has not yet learned to find fulfillment in stillness. It is still looking for stimulation, still convinced that peace is boring and that anxiety is more interesting. But this is a misunderstanding. Peace is not the absence of life. It is the fullness of life experienced without resistance. When we are truly at peace, we do not feel bored. We feel present. We feel connected. We notice the extraordinary richness of ordinary moments, the quality of light, the texture of sound, the simple pleasure of breathing. The worry we manufacture is a poor substitute for this richness. It gives us something to do, but it does not nourish us. It keeps us busy, but it does not bring us alive. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from craving and aversion. We crave pleasant experiences and push away unpleasant ones. This constant grasping and rejecting keeps us agitated, never at rest. But there is a subtler form of craving that we do not always recognize. It is the craving for stimulation itself. The mind, unused to stillness, craves something to engage with. And if nothing pleasant is available, it will settle for something unpleasant. Worry, at least, is something to do. This is why meditation can be so challenging at first. When we sit down and remove all the distractions, the mind does not immediately become peaceful. It becomes restless, casting about for something to grab onto. It may generate worries, memories, fantasies, anything to avoid the unfamiliar experience of simply being still. The practice is not to fight this restlessness. The practice is to see it clearly and to offer it something better. We offer the mind, the breath, the body, the simple sensations of being alive. We show it that there is something here, in this moment, that is worth attending to. And gradually, the craving for stimulation begins to quiet. The mind discovers that stillness is not empty. It is full. In ancient times, there was a traveler who had been walking for many days through difficult terrain, mountains and valleys, storms and scorching sun. By the time he reached a small village, he was exhausted beyond measure. The villagers welcomed him warmly and offered him a place to sleep in the home of an elderly woman who lived alone. She prepared a simple bed for him, brought him tea and bread, and then left him to rest. But the traveler could not sleep. The room was quiet. The bed was comfortable. His body ached with tiredness. Yet his mind would not settle. It kept going over the journey he had completed, replaying difficult moments, wondering if he had made the right choices. Then it leaped ahead to the journey still to come, imagining obstacles, planning routes, worrying about weather and supplies. Hour after hour, he lay there, body exhausted, mind racing. Finally, in the deep of night, he got up and went outside. The elderly woman was sitting on a bench, looking up at the stars. "You cannot sleep," she said. It was not a question. "No," he admitted. "My mind will not let me rest." She nodded slowly, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "You have been traveling for many days," she said. "Your body has learned to keep moving, to stay alert, to watch for danger. It does not know yet that you have arrived somewhere safe. It is still on the road." The traveler sat down beside her and considered this. How do I tell it that I have arrived? He asked. You do not tell it, she said. You show it. You sit here, under these stars, and you let your body feel the stillness. You let your breath slow down. You let the quiet enter you. Eventually, the body understands. It learns that it is safe to rest. They sat together in silence for a long while. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. The night air was cool and soft. And gradually, without any effort, the traveler's mind began to quiet. The racing thoughts slowed. The grip of worry loosened. When he finally returned to his bed, he slept deeply and well. This story speaks to something we all experience. We live in a world that keeps us in a state of constant alertness. There is always more to do, more to worry about, more to plan for. Our nervous systems become trained for vigilance, and they do not easily let go. Even when we are safe, even when we have arrived at a place of rest, the body and mind may continue their old patterns. They do not know that the journey has paused. They are still on the road, still watching for danger, still preparing for the next challenge. The practice of learning to rest is, in part, a practice of teaching the body and mind that safety exists, that it is possible to set down the burden of vigilance, at least for a time, that not every moment requires alertness and effort. This is what the elderly woman understood. She did not give the traveler techniques or strategies. She simply invited him to sit under the stars and let the stillness do its work. The body, given enough time and enough safety, knows how to relax. The mind, given enough space, knows how to quiet. We do not have to force these things. We simply have to create the conditions and allow them to happen. Let us sit with all of this for a moment. We have been exploring a difficult truth, that we often choose worry over peace, not because worry helps us, but because peace is unfamiliar. We have seen how the habit of anxiety can become a kind of home, how we may not believe we deserve to rest, how we sometimes use worry as a substitute for feeling alive. None of this is cause for self-criticism. These patterns developed for reasons that made sense at the time. They were survival strategies, coping mechanisms, ways of navigating a world that often felt unsafe. We can acknowledge them with compassion, even as we begin to outgrow them. The path forward is not to fight against our tendency to worry. Fighting only creates more agitation. The path forward is to gently introduce ourselves to peace, to sit with stillness for short periods and notice what arises, to see the discomfort without running from it, to let the old habits reveal themselves in the light of awareness. Over time, something shifts. Peace becomes more familiar. The pull toward worry weakens. We begin to trust that we can rest without something going wrong, that we can be content without being lazy, that we deserve ease simply because we are alive. This is not a quick process. The habits of a lifetime do not dissolve overnight, but each moment of genuine peace plants a seed. Each time we choose stillness over stimulation, presence over worry, we are rewiring something deep in ourselves. We are learning a new way to be. There is a teaching that compares the mind to a cup of muddy water. When we keep stirring the cup, the water stays cloudy. We cannot see through it. But when we set the cup down and let it be still, the mud gradually settles. The water becomes clear. Our minds are like this. When we keep stirring them with worry and stimulation, they stay cloudy. We cannot see our situation clearly. We cannot access our own wisdom. But when we allow the mind to settle, clarity arises on its own. We do not have to create it. We simply have to stop disturbing it. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you can practice this settling. Not forcing the mind to be still, but simply not stirring it. Letting thoughts arise and pass without grabbing onto them. Letting the mud settle. Letting clarity emerge in its own time. The cup does not have to do anything to become clear. It just has to be set down. And you, too, can set down the habit of worry, just for now, just for these moments, and see what remains when the stirring stops. Let us pause here for a moment. Allow the mind to settle, like mud sinking to the bottom of a still cup. And when you are ready, we will continue our journey together. We have been exploring the hidden addiction to worry, the way we sometimes choose anxiety over peace because stillness feels unfamiliar. Now let us turn toward a subject that our culture often avoids, but which the Buddhist tradition approaches with remarkable openness. It is the subject of how all things pass, how nothing in this world remains forever, and what those who have touched the edges of existence report about what they found there. This is not a morbid topic. It is, in many ways, the most liberating topic of all. For so much of our fear, when we trace it to its root, turns out to be fear of loss. Loss of health, loss of loved ones, loss of security, and ultimately, loss of life itself. When we can make peace with impermanence, when we can accept that all things change and pass, a great weight is lifted. We no longer have to grip so tightly. We can hold life gently, appreciating what is here without being terrified of its eventual departure. The Buddha spoke often of impermanence. All conditioned things are impermanent, he taught. Work out your own salvation with diligence. This was among his final teachings, offered to his students, as he himself was preparing to leave his body. He did not speak of death with fear or sorrow. He spoke of it as a natural part of existence, no more to be dreaded than the setting of the sun or the falling of autumn leaves. Let us begin with something that may surprise you. Those who have come close to the threshold of life, who have had experiences where their bodies nearly gave out and they glimpsed something beyond, almost universally report the same thing. They describe not terror but peace, not darkness but light, not ending but continuation. There was a woman who, many years ago, became very ill. Her body struggled, and for a time, the outcome was uncertain. During the most critical hours, she had an experience that she later described to those who would listen. She found herself, she said, in a place of extraordinary calm. It was as if all the weight she had been carrying, all the concerns and worries and tensions of a lifetime, had simply dissolved. She felt lighter than she had ever felt. There was a quality of love surrounding her, a warmth that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She understood, in that place, that she had never truly been alone, that something vast and gentle had been with her all along. When her body recovered and she returned to ordinary life, she was changed. The things that had once worried her seemed smaller now. The fears that had once gripped her had loosened their hold. She had touched something that could not be taken away, and the memory of it stayed with her. "I am no longer afraid," she said simply, when asked about the experience. "How can I be afraid when I have seen that what waits is so peaceful?" This woman's experience is not unique. Across cultures and centuries, those who have approached the threshold report similar things. A sense of peace, a feeling of being welcomed, an understanding that what we call the end is not really an end at all. The Buddhist tradition has long recognized this. In the teachings on what happens when life leaves the body, there is no fire and brimstone, no punishment waiting for sinners. There is simply a continuation, a transition, like a traveler moving from one room to another. The journey goes on. The essence of who we are does not simply vanish. It transforms. A teacher once explained it this way: think of a wave on the ocean. The wave rises, travels across the water, and eventually reaches the shore. From the wave's perspective, it might seem like the end. The wave crashes and disperses. But from the ocean's perspective, nothing has been lost. The water that made up the wave returns to the sea. It will rise again as another wave, somewhere else, at some other time. We are like waves, the teacher continued. We rise for a time, we travel, we experience. And then we return to the ocean. The form changes, but the water remains. What we truly are cannot be destroyed. This teaching is not offered to minimize the preciousness of this particular life. Each wave is unique. Each journey matters. But understanding that we are part of something larger, something continuous, can ease the grip of fear. We do not have to cling so desperately to this one form. We can appreciate it fully while also trusting that we are more than it. Let us explore another story, one about a teacher and his approach to illness. This teacher was known for his lightness, his ability to meet even difficult circumstances with a kind of gentle humor. When students would come to him worried about their health, anxious about symptoms or diagnoses, he would listen carefully. And then he would often say something surprising. "You know," he would say, "there are really only two possibilities. Either you will get better, or you will not. If you get better, wonderful. If you do not, then you will go on to the next thing. Either way, the worrying does not help." At first, students would sometimes be taken aback by this. It seemed too simple, perhaps even dismissive. But as they sat with it, they began to see the wisdom. So much of our suffering around illness comes not from the illness itself, but from our fear about it. We lie awake imagining terrible outcomes. We read frightening things and apply them to ourselves. We project forward into futures that may never come, suffering now for pain that may never arrive. The teacher was inviting his students to step out of this pattern, to recognize that the present moment, whatever it contains, is workable, to trust that whatever comes next, they will meet it when it arrives, and to stop adding the heavy burden of fear onto the already challenging experience of being unwell. The body knows how to heal, he would say. It has been healing itself your whole life. Give it rest, give it care, and let it do its work. Your job is not to worry. Your job is to be present and to be kind to yourself. There is a teaching in Buddhism about the nature of suffering that illuminates this further. The Buddha observed that suffering has two components. There is the direct experience of something unpleasant, The physical pain of illness, the emotional ache of loss, the discomfort of uncertainty. This is one kind of suffering, and it is often unavoidable. To be alive is to sometimes experience difficulty. But there is a second kind of suffering, one that we create ourselves through our resistance to what is happening. This is the suffering of wishing things were different, of fighting against reality, of layering fear and anger on top of the original difficulty. The Buddha taught that while we cannot always avoid the first kind of suffering, we have a choice about the second. We can learn to meet difficulty without adding to it. We can experience pain without creating extra anguish through our reactions. This applies especially to our relationship with impermanence. The fact that things change, that bodies age, that lives end, this is simply how things are. We can resist this truth, shaking our fist at the nature of existence, and thereby suffer greatly. Or we can accept it, make peace with it, and find a different way to live. Those who have touched the threshold often return with this acceptance already in place. They have seen that what awaits is not terrible, and with that seeing, they are freed to live more fully in whatever time remains. Let us explore another dimension of this teaching, one that concerns not the end of life, but the difficult passages within it. There was a time, many years ago, in a distant land, when a great hardship fell upon a city. It was a period of danger and uncertainty that lasted for many months. People lost homes, lost security, lost the rhythms of ordinary life. By all measures, it was a terrible time. And yet, when the survivors spoke of those days in later years, something surprising emerged. Yes, they said, it was hard. Yes, there was fear and loss and grief. But something else happened too. In the midst of the difficulty, people came together in ways they never had before. Neighbors who had barely spoken became close friends. Strangers helped strangers without thought of reward. A spirit of community arose that had been absent in easier times. We had so little, one survivor remembered, but we shared everything. There was no pretense, no keeping up appearances. We were all in it together, and that togetherness was beautiful. Another said, I learned what really mattered. All the things I had been chasing, the status, the possessions, the endless striving, none of it meant anything when everything was stripped away. What mattered was kindness. What mattered was connection. What mattered was being good to each other. This is not to romanticize hardship or to suggest that suffering is secretly good. The pain was real. The losses were real. But even in the darkest passages, something valuable can emerge. The human spirit has a remarkable capacity to find meaning, to create beauty, to discover depths of compassion that easier times might never have revealed. The Buddha spoke of this when he taught about the lotus flower. The lotus, he observed, grows in muddy water. It sends its roots down into the muck at the bottom of the pond, and from that mud it draws the nutrients it needs to grow. It rises through the murky water, and when it finally breaks the surface, it blooms with extraordinary beauty. The flower is white and pure, untouched by the mud from which it came. Just so, the Buddha taught, wisdom and compassion can grow from the mud of suffering. The difficulties we face become the soil in which our deepest qualities develop. Without the mud, there would be no lotus. Without the challenges of life, there would be no opportunity for awakening. This teaching does not ask us to seek out suffering or to pretend that pain is pleasant. It simply invites us to see that nothing is wasted. The hard times are not merely obstacles to be endured. They are opportunities for growth, for deepening, for discovering what we are truly made of. Those who have faced great difficulties and come through them often speak of this. They would not have chosen the hardship, but they recognized that it changed them, opened them, taught them things that comfort and ease could never have taught. There is a practice in some Buddhist traditions of reflecting on impermanence each day. This might sound morbid to ears unfamiliar with the teaching. Why would anyone want to think about the fact that everything passes? Is that not depressing? But practitioners who engage in this reflection report something quite different. They find that it wakes them up. It reminds them that this day, this moment, this breath is precious precisely because it will not last forever. It helps them let go of petty concerns and focus on what truly matters. It brings a quality of vividness to ordinary experience. Before I began this practice, one student shared, I moved through my days half asleep. I took everything for granted. My health, my loved ones, the simple fact of being alive. It all seemed permanent and therefore not particularly valuable. Now, she continued, I see differently. I know that my time with the people I love is limited. I know that my body will not always be strong. I know that one day this will all be a memory. And that knowing does not make me sad. It makes me grateful. It makes me present. It makes me treasure what I have while I have it. This is the gift that awareness of impermanence can bring. Not dread, but appreciation. Not fear, but love. When we truly understand that everything is passing, we hold it more tenderly. We stop postponing joy for some imagined future and find it here, now, in the midst of our ordinary lives. Let us explore one more story about this way of seeing. There was a monk who lived in a small temple in the mountains. He was very old, and everyone knew that his time was drawing near. Students and friends came from far away to pay their respects and to receive whatever final teachings he might offer. One young student arrived with great sadness in his heart. He had studied with this teacher for many years and could not bear the thought of losing him. When he was finally admitted to the old monk's room, his eyes were filled with tears. The monk looked at him with great tenderness. "Why do you weep?" he asked. "Because you are leaving us," the student said. "Because I do not know how I will continue without your guidance." The monk smiled gently. "Look out the window," he said. "What do you see?" The student turned and looked. Outside, autumn had arrived. The trees that had been green all summer were now blazing with color. Gold, orange, crimson, amber. Leaves drifted down with each passing breeze, carpeting the ground in a patchwork of warm hues. "I see the autumn leaves," the student said. "Are you sad for them?" the monk asked. The student considered this. "No," he admitted. "They are beautiful. And yet they are dying," the monk said. "They are letting go of the branches that held them all summer. They are falling to the ground, where they will decay and become part of the soil. Is this not a kind of death?" "I suppose it is," the student said slowly. "And yet you do not weep for them. You find them beautiful. Why?" The student sat with this question for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Because it is natural. Because it is what leaves do. Because the falling is part of the cycle that brings new leaves in the spring. The monk nodded. Just so. What makes human passing any different? We too are part of the great cycle. We arise for a time, we offer what beauty we can, and then we let go. This is not tragedy. This is the way of things. And there is beauty in it, if we have eyes to see. The student looked at his teacher, so frail and yet so peaceful, and something shifted in his heart. The grief did not disappear entirely, but it was joined by something else. A kind of acceptance, a recognition that this too was part of the teaching. Perhaps the most important part. Be like the autumn leaf, the monk said softly. When it is time to let go gracefully. Do not cling to the branch. Trust the wind. Trust the ground that will receive you. Trust the cycle that continues without end. This story points to a different relationship with impermanence than our culture usually offers. We tend to see change as an enemy, especially the kinds of change that involve loss. We fight against aging, against illness, against the natural rhythms of life. We treat these things as failures, as problems to be solved, as defeats to be avoided at all costs. But the monk in the story, and the Buddhist tradition more broadly, invites us to see change as simply the nature of things. Not good, not bad, just what is. And in accepting what is, we find a peace that resisting could never bring. This does not mean we stop caring. The student loved his teacher deeply, and that love was not diminished by acceptance. If anything, it was purified. Freed from the burden of resistance, it could simply be what it was. Gratitude for the time they had shared, appreciation for the teachings received, love that would continue even after the form had changed. There is a phrase in Buddhism, the deathless. It refers to a dimension of experience that is not touched by impermanence. Not the body, which clearly changes and passes. Not the thoughts, which arise and disappear moment by moment. But something deeper, the awareness itself, the knowing that is present in all experience. This awareness does not age. It was the same when you were a child as it is now. It will be the same in your final moments. Thoughts change, feelings change, the body changes. But the awareness that knows all these changes remains untouched. When we rest in this awareness, when we identify not with the passing contents of experience, but with the knowing of them, we touch something deathless. We discover that what we most essentially are cannot be threatened by change. It is like the sky, which remains vast and open no matter what clouds pass through it. This is what the woman who touched the threshold discovered. This is what gave her such peace. She saw that what she truly was could not be harmed. The body might falter, but she would not. She was the awareness, not the form, and awareness has no ending. Let us consider what this means for the fears we carry. So much of our anxiety is rooted in trying to hold on to things that cannot be held. We want our bodies to stay young and healthy forever. We want our loved ones to never leave. We want our circumstances to remain stable and secure. And because none of this is possible, because change is the nature of all things, we live in a state of constant low-grade fear. What if we could make peace with change? Not resignation, not giving up on caring, but a kind of acceptance that allows us to appreciate what is here without grasping at it so tightly. A way of holding life gently, with open hands, grateful for what comes, and willing to let it go when its time has passed. The great Zen master Shunryu Suzuki wrote, "Without accepting the fact that everything changes, we cannot find perfect composure." But unfortunately, although it is true, it is difficult for us to accept it. Because we cannot accept the truth of impermanence, we suffer. The practice is to accept this truth, not as a burden but as a liberation. When we stop fighting against the nature of existence, we find peace. When we stop demanding that life be other than it is, we can finally appreciate it as it is. As you rest now, let these teachings settle gently. You do not need to figure out the great mysteries tonight. You do not need to resolve your relationship with impermanence in this moment. You can simply rest, knowing that generations of seekers have walked this path before you, and that the wisdom they discovered is available whenever you are ready to receive it. Life is precious because it is fleeting. This moment matters because it will not come again. And the peace that passes understanding is not somewhere else, not in some future time. It is here, now, available in the simple act of being present. The lotus blooms in the mud. The wave returns to the ocean. And you, resting here in the quiet, are part of something vast and continuous, something that has always been and will always be. Let the breath come and go, like waves on the shore. Let the thoughts rise and fall, like leaves on the wind. And know that whatever changes, whatever passes, there is something in you that remains, quiet and still, the witness of all things. Let us pause here for a moment. Let your breath be soft and easy, and when you are ready, we will continue our journey together. We have traveled far together through these teachings. We have seen how fear is often learned rather than natural, how it creates the very outcomes it dreads, how we sometimes choose worry over peace because stillness feels unfamiliar. We have touched the great mystery of impermanence and discovered that even there, peace is possible. Now let us turn to the heart of the practice. For all these teachings, as beautiful as they are, remain mere ideas until we put them into action. The question that matters is this: how do we actually live without fear? How do we build a life of peace, not as a distant goal, but as a daily reality? The Buddha offered a path. It is not complicated, though it requires patience and practice. It begins with a simple recognition. We cannot control the world, but we can choose how we meet it. Consider how much of our suffering comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. We try to control other people, wanting them to behave as we think they should. We try to control circumstances, arranging and rearranging our lives to keep difficulty at bay. We try to control our bodies, demanding that they remain young and healthy regardless of time's passage. We even try to control our minds, fighting against thoughts and feelings we do not want. And all of this effort exhausts us, because none of it works. Not really. Not for long. Other people continue to be themselves, regardless of our wishes. Circumstances shift and change despite our best plans. The body ages and sometimes falls ill no matter how carefully we tend it. And the mind, as anyone who has tried to meditate knows, does not take orders well. A teacher once put it simply: you cannot control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. This is the beginning of wisdom. Recognizing that so much of life lies beyond our power and turning our attention to what actually can be changed, the way we respond, the attitude we bring, the quality of presence we offer to each moment. The Buddha spoke of this in terms of intention. Intention, he taught, is the seed of all action. What we intend shapes what we do, and what we do shapes the world we create around us. If we act from fear, we create more fear. If we act from anger, we create more conflict. But if we act from peace, from kindness, from gentleness, we create the conditions for peace to grow. This is the teaching of karma, understood properly. Not as some cosmic reward and punishment system, but as a natural law. What we put out returns to us. The seeds we plant determine the harvest we reap. If we want a life of peace, we must plant peaceful seeds, moment by moment, day by day. There are 3 intentions that the Buddhist tradition particularly emphasizes. They are simple to understand, though they require a lifetime to master. They are peace, kindness, and gentleness. Peace means meeting each moment without resistance, not fighting against what is, not demanding that reality be other than it is, simply being present with what is here, now, without adding the extra suffering of complaint and struggle. Kindness means wishing well, toward ourselves, toward others, toward all beings. It is the intention to help rather than harm, to support rather than undermine, to offer goodwill even when it is not returned. Gentleness means softness of approach, not forcing, not pushing, not trying to make things happen through sheer effort. Moving through life with a light touch, like water flowing around stones rather than crashing against them. These 3 intentions can be brought to any situation. No matter what is happening, no matter how difficult the circumstances, we can always ask, can I meet this with peace? Can I bring kindness here? Can I be gentle? Let us explore how this might work in practice. There was a meditation center where practitioners would come for periods of intensive practice. For several days or weeks, they would sit in silence, following a careful schedule of meditation, rest, and simple meals. The aim was to quiet the mind and deepen awareness. But the center was located near a neighborhood where ordinary life continued. And in that neighborhood, there was a dog. This dog had opinions, strong opinions, and it expressed them frequently, especially in the evenings when the meditators were sitting in silence. The barking would ring out across the quiet grounds, shattering the stillness that the practitioners were working so hard to cultivate. Many of the meditators found this deeply frustrating. They had come seeking peace, and here was this noise, this intrusion, this obstacle to their practice. Some complained to the teachers. Some tried stuffing cotton in their ears. Some sat and fumed, their meditation consumed by irritation at this inconsiderate animal. But the teacher who led the center had a different approach. "The dog is barking," he would say simply. "That is what dogs do. Can you make peace with this?" At first, this seemed like an unreasonable request. How could anyone make peace with such an annoying noise? The barking was loud, it was unpredictable, it was clearly interfering with the practice. But the teacher persisted. "You cannot control the dog," he said. "You have no power over whether it barks or when it barks or how long it continues. This is simply a fact. But you have complete power over how you meet the barking. You can meet it with resistance and suffer, or you can meet it with acceptance and be at peace. Over time, some of the practitioners began to understand. They noticed that the barking itself was just sound, vibrations in the air. It was their resistance to the sound, their story that it should not be happening, that created most of their suffering. When they dropped the resistance, when they simply let the sound be sound, something shifted. The barking continued, but they were no longer at war with it. One student reported a remarkable change. I was sitting there, irritated as usual, when suddenly I just let go. I stopped fighting the dog. And in that moment, the barking actually became part of my meditation. It was just another sound, like the wind in the trees or the birds in the morning. I realized the dog had been my teacher all along, showing me where I was still holding on, still resisting, still at war with life. This story illustrates something essential about the path of peace. We often think that peace depends on circumstances. If only the dog would stop barking. If only my neighbor would be quieter. If only my body did not ache. If only my thoughts would settle down, then I could be at peace. But this is backwards. Peace does not come from controlling circumstances. It comes from changing our relationship to them. It comes from meeting whatever arises with acceptance rather than resistance, with kindness rather than complaint, with gentleness rather than force. The dog will bark. The neighbor will make noise. The body will sometimes ache. The mind will sometimes race. This is simply life. And our task is not to eliminate all difficulty, but to find peace in the midst of it. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." This is not a rejection of the outer world. It is a recognition that our inner state determines our experience far more than external circumstances do. Two people can face the same situation, one in misery and one at peace. The difference is not in what is happening, but in how they are meeting it. Let us explore another dimension of this teaching. There was once a practitioner who asked her teacher, "How do I become peaceful? I have been meditating for years, but my mind is still restless. I still get caught up in worry and frustration. What am I doing wrong?" The teacher considered this question carefully. "Tell me," he said, "when you sit down to meditate, what is your intention?" "To become peaceful," she said. "And when your mind wanders, what do you do?" "I bring it back to the breath. Sometimes I get frustrated with myself for wandering." The teacher nodded. "Here is the problem. You are trying to achieve peace through effort. You are fighting against your own mind, demanding that it be other than it is. This fighting is itself the opposite of peace. Then what should I do?" she asked. "Instead of trying to become peaceful," the teacher said, "practice being peaceful. Right now, with whatever is arising." "I do not understand the difference," the student admitted. Trying to become peaceful puts peace in the future. It says, "I will be peaceful when my mind settles down." But being peaceful happens now. It says, "I can be peaceful with this busy mind. I can be kind to these wandering thoughts. I can be gentle with this moment, exactly as it is." The student sat with this teaching. "You are not trying to change your experience," the teacher continued. "You are changing your relationship to your experience. The busy mind can stay busy, but you can meet it with peace instead of frustration. And that meeting, that peace in the midst of busyness, is the practice. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. We often approach meditation and spiritual practice more broadly as a project of self-improvement. We want to become calmer, wiser, more peaceful, and there is nothing wrong with this aspiration. But if we hold it too tightly, it becomes another source of striving, another thing to achieve, another way of being at war with ourselves. The deeper teaching is that peace is available now, not as a future attainment, but as a present possibility. In any moment, regardless of circumstances, we can choose to meet what is here with acceptance. We can offer kindness to ourselves and others. We can move gently rather than forcefully. This does not mean we will never experience difficulty. Pain will still arise. Challenges will still come. But we do not have to wait until challenges disappear to be at peace. We can be at peace with the challenges. We can be kind to ourselves in the midst of struggle. We can be gentle even when things are hard. There is a beautiful image used to describe this practice. It is the image of building a house. Imagine that you are building a house of peace. This house is not built all at once. It is built brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. Each time you meet a difficult moment with acceptance rather than resistance, you lay one brick. Each time you offer kindness instead of judgment, you lay another. Each time you respond with gentleness instead of force, another brick finds its place. In the beginning, the house is small. Just a few bricks here and there. The walls are low. The shelter is incomplete. A strong wind might still blow through. But over time, as you continue the practice, the house grows. Brick by brick, moment by moment. The walls rise higher. The structure becomes more solid. What was once a fragile shelter becomes a sturdy dwelling. This is how peace is built. Not through dramatic breakthroughs or sudden transformations, but through patient, consistent practice. Through choosing peace again and again, in small moments that no one else may notice. The circumstances of your life are the raw materials. Whatever you encounter, pleasant or unpleasant, becomes an opportunity to lay another brick. The difficult boss, the traffic jam, the sleepless night, the aching body. Each one is not an obstacle to peace, but an invitation to practice. And slowly, surely, the house takes shape. You begin to notice that you are less rattled by difficulty. That peace is more available, more familiar. That you know how to find your way back when you get lost. The house of peace becomes your home. Let us explore one more story that brings this teaching to life. There was a practitioner who lived in a small apartment in a busy city. Outside her window, the noise of traffic flowed ceaselessly. Horns, engines, sirens, the endless rush of people going somewhere. She had chosen this apartment because it was affordable, but the noise sometimes felt unbearable. She asked her teacher what to do. "I cannot afford to move," she said. "And I cannot make the city quiet. Am I doomed to be disturbed forever?" The teacher smiled. "Tell me about your practice." "I try to meditate," she said, "but the noise makes it impossible. Every time I start to settle, another horn or siren pulls me out. And what do you do when that happens? I get frustrated. I think about how much I wish it were quiet. Sometimes I give up entirely. The teacher nodded. The city will not become quiet. This is not something you can change. But there is something you can do. Each time a sound arises and you notice frustration, pause. Notice the frustration. And then, deliberately, offer peace to the moment. Say inwardly, I make peace with this sound. I offer kindness to my frustration. I hold this moment gently. Will that make the noise go away? She asked. No, the teacher said. But it will change your relationship to the noise. And that is all that needs to change. The practitioner went home and tried this approach. It was difficult at first. The habit of frustration was strong, but she persisted. Each time a sound arose and she noticed resistance, she paused. She offered peace. She offered kindness. She offered gentleness. Something remarkable began to happen. The noise did not decrease, but her suffering around it did. The sounds became simply sounds, no longer enemies to her peace. She found she could meditate even in the midst of the city's roar. The house of peace was being built, one brick at a time, right there in her noisy apartment. This is the practice that is available to all of us. We do not need perfect conditions. We do not need silence, solitude, or retreat from the world. We need only the willingness to meet each moment with peace, kindness, and gentleness. We need only the patience to lay one brick at a time. The Buddha taught that the mind is the forerunner of all actions. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, he said, and happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. This is the promise of the practice. Not that life will become easy, but that we will learn to meet it with ease. Not that difficulty will disappear, but that we will no longer be at war with it. Brick by brick, we build a dwelling that cannot be shaken by circumstance. We find our home in peace itself. Let us sit with a small reflection before we continue. Think of something in your life that has been troubling you. It might be a situation at work, a difficulty in a relationship, a concern about health or finances. Something that, when you think of it, creates a tightening in your chest or a heaviness in your mind. Now, without trying to solve or change this situation, simply ask, can I meet this with peace? Can I offer kindness to myself as I face this? Can I hold this difficulty gently, the way I might hold a fragile bird? You do not need to fix anything. You do not need to make the problem disappear. You are simply practicing a different way of being with difficulty. You are laying a brick in the house of peace. Notice what happens when you bring these intentions to something hard. Perhaps there is a small softening. Perhaps the grip loosens just a little. Perhaps you feel, for a moment, that you do not have to be at war with this situation. That peace is possible even here. This is the practice, and it is available in every moment, with every challenge, for the rest of your life. There is a teaching about a farmer that illuminates this further. An old farmer had worked his land for many years. One day, his horse ran away. The neighbors came to offer their sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said. "Perhaps," said the farmer. The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors came to celebrate. "What wonderful luck," they said. "Perhaps," said the farmer. The following day, the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses and was thrown, breaking his leg. The neighbors came to offer condolences. "What terrible luck," they said. "Perhaps," said the farmer. The next week, military officials came to the village to conscript young men for war. The farmer's son, with his broken leg, was passed over. The neighbors came to celebrate. "What wonderful luck," they said. "Perhaps," said the farmer. This story points to a profound wisdom. We rarely know what events truly mean. What seems like misfortune may lead to blessing. What seems like blessing may lead to difficulty. The farmer understood this, and so he did not ride the waves of good and bad fortune. He remained steady, meeting each circumstance with the same quiet presence. This is another aspect of building the house of peace. We learn not to be tossed about by the judgments of good and bad, lucky and unlucky. We meet each moment as it is, without adding layers of interpretation that only increase our suffering. The Buddha spoke of equanimity as one of the highest qualities a person can develop. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not coldness or detachment. It is a steady, balanced presence that can meet both joy and sorrow without being overwhelmed by either. It is the farmer's quiet perhaps in the face of fortune and misfortune alike. There is one final teaching to offer before we rest. The practice we have been describing is not about perfection. No one meets every moment with peace. No one brings kindness to every situation. No one is gentle all the time. We are human, and humans falter. What matters is not that we never fail, but that we begin again. Each moment is fresh. Each breath is a new opportunity. When we notice that we have fallen into resistance, frustration, or harshness, we can simply pause and begin again. Lay another brick. Return to the practice. The great Zen teacher, Shunryu Suzuki, said, "Each moment is a chance to start over." This is the spirit of the path. Not grim determination or relentless self-improvement, but gentle persistence. We fall, and we begin again. We forget, and we remember. We get lost, and we find our way home. The house of peace is never finished. It is always being built, always being renewed, always welcoming us back when we have wandered. And the building itself, the patient laying of bricks, becomes a source of quiet joy. As you rest now, perhaps you can feel the foundations of your own house of peace. You have been laying bricks all along, even if you did not know it. Every moment of acceptance, every offering of kindness, every choice to meet life gently has added to the structure. It stands within you now, more solid than you may realize. Tomorrow will bring its challenges. The dog may bark. The city may roar. The mind may wander. But you know now what to do. You know that peace is not about controlling circumstances, but about how you meet them. You know that kindness and gentleness are always available, in any situation, no matter how difficult. The Buddha's hand is raised in the gesture of fearlessness. And that gesture lives in you now too. It is the willingness to meet life with an open heart, to build your house of peace, brick by brick, to rest in stillness, even when the world moves noisily around you. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel the quiet that has been building through these teachings. And when you are ready, we will bring our journey gently to a close. We have traveled far together tonight. We sat with stories of forests and deer, of students and teachers, of pools that were not as cold as they seemed. We explored why fear takes hold and how it loosens its grip. We learned that peace is built slowly, moment by moment, the way a house is built brick by brick. These teachings have been passed down for over 2,000 years. They have crossed oceans and mountains. They have been shared in temples and in humble rooms. And tonight, they have been shared with you. The Buddha's hand remains raised. The palm remains open. The ancient message still holds. Do not be afraid. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. The stories will continue their quiet work as you rest. Whatever you needed to hear, you have heard. Whatever seeds were meant to be planted have found their soil. Let your breath slow now. Let your body settle completely. The journey continues tomorrow and the day after, for as long as you walk this path. But for now, there is only rest. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.